At June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m., the largest amphibious invasion in human history is underway. 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 Allied troops crashing against Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Operation Overlord D-Day, the moment that will decide the fate of Europe, perhaps the world. But in a converted Georgian mansion in Portsmouth, England, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits alone in his office, reading a single sheet of paper. His hand trembles slightly, not from fear of the German defenders waiting on the beaches, not from anxiety about the weather that nearly forced him to postpone everything. No, what troubles Eisenhower in this moment is a realization that's been building for weeks, crystallizing now into terrible clarity. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commander of all Allied ground forces for the invasion, has fundamentally misunderstood what they're about to face. The paper in Eisenhower's hands is an intelligence summary. German panzer divisions, stronger than Montgomery predicted, positioned closer than Montgomery claimed, ready to counterattack faster than Montgomery planned for, and Montgomery's response: dismiss the intelligence, trust his instincts, proceed as planned. Eisenhower sets the paper down. Through his window, he can see nothing but gray English fog. Across the channel, young Americans, Brits, and Canadians are bleeding on beaches with names that will echo through history: Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword. And their ground commander, the man responsible for turning Beachhead into Breakthrough, may have just made a catastrophic miscalculation. This is not the story you know about D-Day. This is the story of what happens when ego meets reality, when a brilliant but arrogant commander's vision collides with the chaos of actual war, when the Supreme Commander realizes, too late to change course, that his most important subordinate got it wrong. This is the moment Eisenhower realized Montgomery misjudged the Normandy landing. The official history of D-Day is triumphant: the greatest generation, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, Allied unity and coordination defeating fascist tyranny. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, hero of El Alamein, leading the ground assault with tactical genius. General Dwight David Eisenhower, the diplomatic commander who held the alliance together. It's a good story, it's mostly true, but it's incomplete. What the history books downplay is the friction, the tension between American and British commanders that threatened to derail the entire operation. The personality clashes that made planning D-Day feel, at times, like managing a powder keg with a lit fuse. At the center of that tension, Bernard Montgomery, 56 years old, thin, wiry, sharp-featured, commander of the 21st Army Group, designated Ground Forces Commander for Operation Overlord, a man whose confidence in his own abilities bordered on messianic. Montgomery believed he was the finest military mind of his generation. His victory over Rommel at El Alamein in 1942 had made him Britain's greatest war hero. He'd saved Egypt, turned the tide in North Africa, given Churchill something to celebrate when Britain desperately needed it. And he'd done it his way: methodical, careful, overwhelming force applied at the chosen point. Now, 2 years later, Montgomery approached Normandy with the same philosophy: concentrate forces, build overwhelming superiority, attack when conditions are perfect, accept nothing but complete success. He told anyone who would listen that the invasion would succeed because he was commanding it. Eisenhower, by contrast, was a different kind of commander, 53 years old, broad smile, Midwestern practicality, a supreme diplomat who'd never commanded troops in combat until 1942. His genius wasn't tactical, it was political. He kept Americans, British, Canadians, French, and Poles working together when national pride, strategic disagreements, and personal egos threatened to tear the alliance apart daily. But Eisenhower wasn't naive. He'd watched Montgomery closely since 1943, watched him in Sicily, where Montgomery's caution had let German forces escape, watched him in Italy, where his methodical approach had turned swift victory into grinding stalemate, watched him plan for Normandy, growing increasingly concerned about what he saw. Montgomery's plan for D-Day was elegant on paper: land 5 divisions along a 50-mile front, secure the beaches, capture Caen, a critical road junction 7 miles inland, on the first day, use Caen as the hinge for a massive wheeling movement that would trap German forces against the Seine River within weeks. The problem? Montgomery seemed to think the Germans would cooperate, that they'd react slowly, predictably, exactly as his plan required, that British and Canadian forces would simply walk into Caen on D-Day afternoon because the plan said they would. Eisenhower saw the flaw, so did his intelligence officers, so did several American generals. The Germans weren't beaten, they were still dangerous. And Caen, sitting at the junction of multiple highways, perfect tank country surrounding it, was exactly the kind of objective the Germans would fight like hell to keep. By early June 1944, intelligence reports were confirming Eisenhower's fears. The 21st Panzer Division was positioned near Caen, The 12th SS Panzer Division was within striking distance. These weren't second-rate occupation troops. These were elite formations, well-equipped, fanatically motivated. If they counterattacked quickly, they could turn the beaches into a killing ground. Montgomery dismissed the concerns. He'd faced Rommel before and won. He'd face whatever the Germans threw at him and win again. Trust the plan, trust his judgment. Everything would unfold as predicted. Eisenhower couldn't overrule him, not directly. Montgomery commanded all ground forces for the invasion that had been Churchill's condition for British cooperation. All Eisenhower could do was watch, worry, and pray that Montgomery's confidence was justified. As dawn broke on June 6th, Eisenhower realized his prayers might not be answered. To understand what went wrong, you need to understand Bernard Montgomery, not the legend, the man. Montgomery's arrogance wasn't simply personality quirk. It was armor, forged in the trenches of World War I, where he'd been shot through the lung and left for dead. Tempered by decades in a peacetime British army that valued aristocratic background over professional competence, where Montgomery, middle-class, tactless, socially awkward, had to fight for every promotion. By 1944, Montgomery had proven himself repeatedly. North Africa, Sicily, Italy, he'd won when others failed. He delivered victory when Britain desperately needed it. In his mind, he'd earned the right to be difficult, abrasive, supremely confident. He'd earned the right to dismiss doubters. But that confidence had blind spots. Montgomery excelled at set-piece battles, situations where he could mass forces, prepare meticulously, attack on his timetable. What he struggled with was chaos, improvisation, the kind of fluid, fast-moving warfare where plans collapsed and commanders had to adapt instantly. Normandy would be chaos incarnate. Montgomery's personal style compounded the problem. He didn't collaborate, he lectured. He didn't discuss, he pronounced. His staff meetings felt like sermons, with Montgomery as prophet delivering revealed truth. He surrounded himself with loyalists who reinforced his views rather than challenging them. His relationship with his American counterparts was particularly toxic. He considered most American generals amateurs, brave, energetic, but fundamentally unsophisticated. He barely concealed his contempt in meetings, making snide comments about American enthusiasm, overwhelming tactical sense. Eisenhower tolerated Montgomery because he had no choice. The alliance required British cooperation. Churchill required Montgomery's involvement, and despite everything, Montgomery was a competent commander. Cautious to a fault, difficult to work with but competent. Still, Eisenhower harbored doubts. In private conversations with his chief of staff, Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower voiced concerns: Montgomery's rigidity, his inability to adjust when reality didn't match his plans, his tendency to declare victory even when objectives weren't met. "Monty sees what he wants to see," Eisenhower told Smith during a late April planning session. "And right now, he wants to see Caen falling on D-Day." Smith, ever the realist, asked the obvious question: what happens if it doesn't? Eisenhower didn't answer immediately. Finally, then we find out if Monty can adapt, because the entire operation depends on moving inland fast. If we're stuck on the beaches, if the Germans pin us down, we could lose everything. The question hanging in the room: could Montgomery adapt? His track record suggested otherwise. In North Africa, he'd won by assembling overwhelming force and attacking only when ready, brilliantly effective but impossibly slow. In Sicily and Italy, his caution had repeatedly let enemies escape, prolonging campaigns that should have ended months earlier. Now, in the largest, most complex military operation in history, Montgomery would face the ultimate test. And Eisenhower, reading intelligence reports in the pre-dawn hours of June 6th, had a sinking feeling that his ground commander was about to fail it. Montgomery, meanwhile, was supremely confident. He'd spent the evening of June 5th reviewing maps, making final adjustments, radiating certainty. To him, D-Day wasn't a gamble, it was a foregone conclusion. The Germans would be smashed, Caen would fall. The campaign would unfold precisely as he'd planned. It was 2:00 a.m. on June 6th when Montgomery finally went to bed. He slept soundly. Why wouldn't he? Everything was under control. By 7:00 a.m., reality was already proving him wrong. The first reports from the beaches arrive at Eisenhower's headquarters around 8:00 a.m. American forces at Omaha Beach are pinned down, taking horrific casualties. Utah Beach is going better, troops are moving inland. British and Canadian beaches, Gold, Juno, Sword, are mixed, heavy resistance, slower progress than planned, but nothing catastrophic, not yet. Eisenhower tracks each report, each radio message, feeling the weight of 156,000 lives pressing down on him. But he's watching for something specific. Watching for news from the British 3rd Division pushing toward Caen, watching to see if Montgomery's confident prediction, Con by nightfall, will materialize. By 10:00 a.m. the pattern is clear. The British are ashore. They're pushing inland, but they're moving cautiously, consolidating, securing positions, not driving hard for Con. And the Germans are reacting. The 21st Panzer Division is counterattacking, not in overwhelming force, not yet, but probing, testing, looking for weaknesses. Doing exactly what Eisenhower feared and Montgomery dismissed. At his headquarters in Croulet, France, a forward command post he'll occupy within days, Montgomery receives the same reports. His reaction is telling. He declares the landings a complete success. Resistance is light, everything proceeding according to plan. Con will fall as predicted. It's either stunning denial or calculated spin, probably both. By 4:00 p.m. the truth is undeniable. British forces are nowhere near Con. The 3rd Division has advanced about 6 miles, impressive under the circumstances, but not enough. The countryside around Con is revealing itself as defender's paradise, small fields bordered by thick hedgerows perfect for German defensive positions. And the Germans are defending with skill and determination. The 21st Panzer Division launches a major counterattack at 4:30 p.m. German tanks drive a wedge between British forces and the beach. For several hours the invasion hangs by a thread. If the Germans had more forces available, if they'd coordinated better, they might have driven the British back into the sea. They don't succeed, but they don't need to. They simply need to delay, and they're doing that brilliantly. By nightfall on June 6, not a single major D-Day objective has been fully achieved. Omaha Beach nearly failed. American forces are clinging to a thin strip of sand and bluff. The British haven't taken Con. The Canadians haven't reached their objectives. The entire operation is hours behind schedule. Montgomery issues a statement declaring D-Day a total success. His forces are ashore, the Atlantic Wall is breached, the campaign is unfolding as planned. Eisenhower reads the statement with growing frustration. Yes, they're ashore. Yes, they've breached the Atlantic Wall, but unfolding as planned, Con, the critical objective, the hinge for the entire campaign, remains in German hands, and Montgomery seems unconcerned. Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeats. British forces attack toward Con. German forces defend with increasing strength. Panzer divisions arrive first, the 21st, then the 12th SS, then the Panzer Lehr Division. Elite formations that Montgomery's intelligence had dismissed as unable to concentrate quickly. Except they are concentrating, and they're stopping Montgomery cold. By June 9th, Eisenhower flies to Normandy for a personal assessment. He tours the beaches, talks to commanders, reviews maps. The picture is clear, they're winning but not as planned. The Americans are grinding forward through the hedgerows. The British are stalemated before Con. He meets with Montgomery that afternoon. Montgomery is confident, cheerful, completely unruffled. Everything is fine. Con will fall soon. The Germans are exhausted, just a matter of time. Eisenhower presses him. Monty, we're a week into this. Con was supposed to fall on D-Day. Now we're talking about weeks. The entire campaign depended on moving fast. Montgomery waves off the concern. Eisenhower, you must trust me. I'm drawing the German panzers onto the British sector, holding them there, creating the conditions for the American breakout. It's all part of the plan. Eisenhower leaves the meeting troubled. Is Montgomery adapting his strategy because Con didn't fall, or is he retrofitting his original plan to match current reality? The difference matters. Good commanders adjust when circumstances change. Failed commanders pretend circumstances are changing according to plan. The breaking point comes on June 13th. 1 week after D-Day, Operation Perch, Montgomery's attempt to outflank Con has just failed. British forces attempted a hook around the city's western side. They ran straight into German panzers and were stopped cold. That morning, Eisenhower receives an intelligence briefing that confirms his worst fears. The Germans have concentrated 6 panzer divisions, 6 around Con, half of Germany's total armored strength in France. They're not scattered across Normandy as Montgomery predicted. They're massed at precisely the point where Montgomery said they wouldn't be. More troubling, British casualties are mounting. Replacements are limited. Britain has been at war for 5 years. The manpower well is running dry. Every battalion lost, every company decimated, can't be easily replaced. The Americans, meanwhile, are bogged down in the hedgerows, making progress but slowly at horrific cost. The breakout Montgomery promised, the rapid thrust that would trap German forces and end the campaign quickly, is nowhere in sight. Eisenhower calls a conference. His senior staff, American generals Omar Bradley and George Patton, British officers representing Montgomery. The tension in the room is palpable. Eisenhower lays out the situation bluntly. They're behind schedule. Casualties are higher than projected. The The Germans are fighting better than expected, and Kahn, critical to the entire campaign, remains firmly in enemy hands after a week of trying. He asks the question everyone's thinking: did we underestimate German strength around Kahn? The British officers stiffen. One attempts to defend Montgomery's planning, the intelligence available in May suggested. Eisenhower cuts him off. The intelligence available in early June showed panzer divisions concentrating near Kahn. I saw the reports. General Montgomery saw the reports. Were those reports wrong? Silence. Were they wrong? Eisenhower repeats. No, sir, comes the quiet reply. They were accurate. Eisenhower turns to Bradley. Omar, tell me about the American sector. Bradley, commander of 1st Army, is direct. We're making progress, but it's slow. The hedgerows are worse than we thought. German defense is skilled. If we'd taken Kahn on schedule, we'd have more maneuver room. But we didn't, so we're grinding forward field by field. Patton, not officially in theater yet but present as an observer, can't help himself. Give me 3rd Army and I'll be in Paris in 2 weeks. It's vintage Patton, overconfident, aggressive, theatrical, but the underlying point lands. The Americans want to attack. They're frustrated by the stalemate, and they're starting to blame Montgomery. After the meeting, Eisenhower sits alone in his office. The realization that's been building for weeks is now unavoidable. Montgomery misjudged the German response. Not completely, his overall plan was sound, but critically, he underestimated German strength, overestimated British ability to take Kahn quickly, built an entire campaign timeline on assumptions that proved false. And now Eisenhower has to decide. Does he intervene? Does he modify Montgomery's authority? Does he risk a political crisis with Churchill and the British by publicly overruling their most celebrated commander? Or does he let Montgomery continue, hoping the field marshal can adapt and salvage his plan? It's the loneliest decision of Eisenhower's career. Eisenhower chooses a middle path. He doesn't remove Montgomery, can't politically, but he begins subtly shifting authority, asserting more direct control, pushing Montgomery toward greater aggression. In a tense meeting on June 15th, Eisenhower tells Montgomery plainly, "We need Kahn, not eventually. Now, the Americans are bleeding in the hedgerows because we don't have maneuver room. You said Kahn would fall on D-Day. It's been 9 days. What's your plan to take it?" Montgomery bristles. He's not accustomed to being questioned. Certainly not by Eisenhower, whom he considers a political commander, not a military one, but he recognizes the pressure from Churchill, from the American chiefs, from Eisenhower himself. He proposes Operation Epsom, a major offensive west of Kahn attempting to encircle the city. It will launch on June 26th, 20 days after D-Day. The offensive fails. British forces gain ground but don't break through. German panzers counterattack ferociously. After 5 days of brutal fighting, Epsom ends with Kahn still in German hands and British casualties approaching 30,000. The political consequences are immediate. American generals openly question British effectiveness. Patton privately calls Montgomery timid. Bradley, more diplomatic, nevertheless makes clear to Eisenhower that American patience is wearing thin. Churchill flies to Normandy on June 28th. He meets privately with Montgomery. The conversation is heated. Churchill needs results. The British public is growing anxious. American newspapers are questioning British fighting spirit. Montgomery must take Kahn. Montgomery finally does partially in early July. Operation Charnwood captures the northern half of the city. Operation Jupiter attempts to push further. Operation Goodwood, the biggest British offensive of the campaign, launches on July 18th. Goodwood is supposed to be the breakthrough. 3 armored divisions, 700 tanks, the largest British armored assault since El Alamein. Montgomery tells Churchill it will crack the German line. He tells Eisenhower the battle will be decisive. It's neither. German anti-tank guns positioned on Berguebus Ridge slaughter British armor. Within hours the offensive is blunted. Within days it's called off. British tank losses over 400. German line intact. Eisenhower is furious, not at the failure, war is unpredictable, but at Montgomery's spin. Before Goodwood, Montgomery promised a breakthrough. After Goodwood, he claims it was always intended as a limited operation to hold German panzers. He declares it a success because it accomplished exactly what he intended. Eisenhower doesn't buy it, neither do the American generals. Neither, increasingly, does Churchill. By late July 1944, the command structure is shifting. Eisenhower begins planning to assume direct control of ground forces once enough American troops are in France. Montgomery will retain command of British-Canadian forces but lose his overarching authority. Montgomery fights the change, appeals to Churchill, argues that splitting the command will reduce effectiveness. But the decision is made. His misjudgment of Khan has cost him. Ironically, Montgomery's strategy, if you can call it that, eventually works. By concentrating German armor around Khan, he creates conditions for American breakthrough elsewhere. Operation Cobra, launching on July 25th, finally ruptures the German line. Patton's Third Army pours through. The war becomes mobile again. But it's not Montgomery's genius that makes it happen. It's American aggression and German mistakes. And it happens 6 weeks later than planned. Khan finally falls completely in mid-July, 40 days after D-Day, 40 days after Montgomery promised it would fall in hours. The delay costs lives. Allied casualties in Normandy are staggering, over 200,000 killed, wounded, or missing by the end of August. How many died because Khan didn't fall on schedule? Because the campaign stalled for weeks while Montgomery attacked a fortress city? Impossible to say. But some number thousands certainly paid the price for Montgomery's misjudgment. On September 1, 1944, Eisenhower officially assumes command of all Allied ground forces. Montgomery is promoted to Field Marshal, a gesture to soothe British pride, but loses operational control. He'll command 21st Army Group for the rest of the war, but always under Eisenhower's direct authority. Montgomery never admits the error. In his memoirs published years later, he insists Khan was always intended to be a grinding battle, that his strategy was to hold German panzers on the British front while Americans broke out elsewhere, that everything unfolded as planned. It's a rewriting of history. Eisenhower's papers, released later, reveal the truth. In planning meetings, Montgomery explicitly said Khan would fall on D-Day. In June reports, he insisted Khan would fall soon. Only after weeks of failure did the narrative shift to holding panzers was always the plan. The British-American alliance survives but never fully recovers the trust. American generals spend the rest of the war skeptical of British plans. British commanders grow resentful of American dominance. The seeds of post-war tensions, NATO disputes, Suez Crisis disagreements, are planted in the hedgerows of Normandy. For Eisenhower, the experience is formative. He learns that brilliant commanders can have blind spots. That confidence can mask misjudgment. That sometimes the hardest leadership decision is realizing your subordinate, for all his experience and success, has gotten it wrong. He also learns the limits of coalition warfare. You can't simply fire Allied commanders, no matter how badly they perform. You have to manage egos, soothe political sensitivities, work around problems rather than through them. It's exhausting. After the war, when asked about the hardest part of commanding in Europe, Eisenhower doesn't talk about German resistance or supply problems or strategic decisions. He talks about managing Montgomery. Monty was brilliant, Eisenhower says in a 1946 interview. But he couldn't accept being wrong, and in war everyone is wrong sometimes. The good commanders adjust. Monty declared victory and moved on. It's the closest Eisenhower ever comes to public criticism. But those who were there, who saw the reports, attended the meetings, watched Eisenhower's frustration build, know what he means. Montgomery misjudged Normandy. Specifically, he misjudged the German reaction to the Khan thrust. He thought they'd collapse, they concentrated. He thought Khan would fall in hours. It took 6 weeks. He thought his plan was flawless. It nearly derailed the entire campaign. And Eisenhower realized it too late to prevent the cost, but early enough to save the operation. There's a moment in every leader's life when they realize that competence and confidence aren't the same thing. That past success doesn't guarantee future judgment. That the people you rely on, brilliant, experienced, proven, can still get it catastrophically wrong. For Eisenhower, that moment came at 6:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, reading intelligence reports, watching the largest military operation in history unfold, knowing with terrible clarity that his ground commander had misjudged the enemy. He couldn't stop the invasion, couldn't change the plan mid-execution. All he could do was watch, adjust where possible, and pray that Allied courage and German mistakes would compensate for Montgomery's miscalculation. They did, but barely. The lesson of Normandy isn't that Montgomery was incompetent. He wasn't. It's that even brilliant commanders can fall victim to their own certainty, can see what they want to see, can mistake their vision for reality. Montgomery wanted Khan to fall quickly because his plan required it, so he convinced himself it would. He dismissed intelligence that contradicted his assumptions, surrounded himself with people who reinforced his views, built an entire campaign on hope disguised as analysis. Eisenhower's genius was recognizing the problem and adapting despite political constraints. He couldn't remove Montgomery, but he could limit the damage, shift resources, assert control, eventually take direct command. It's not the heroic leadership you see in movies. It's messier, more political, less satisfying, but it's real. War doesn't care about your plan, the enemy gets a vote, circumstances change, assumptions prove false. The commanders who succeed aren't the ones with perfect foresight, they are the ones who adapt when reality diverges from expectation. Montgomery never learned that lesson. He died in 1976, still insisting that Normandy unfolded exactly as he planned, still certain of his genius, still unable to admit that on June 6, 1944, he got it wrong. Eisenhower went on to be Supreme Allied Commander through victory in Europe, then NATO Commander, then President of the United States. He carried the lessons of Normandy, the importance of adaptability, humility, coalition management throughout his career. And late in life, when asked about the keys to leadership, he gave an answer forged in those desperate June days. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. When the crisis comes, the plan is usually the first casualty. What matters is whether you can see clearly, decide quickly, and adapt honestly. Montgomery planned brilliantly, but when the plan failed, he couldn't see it, couldn't admit it, couldn't adapt. Eisenhower could. That's why when history remembers D-Day, it remembers the supreme commander who held everything together when his plan and his ground commander fell apart. The moment Eisenhower realized Montgomery misjudged Normandy was the moment he truly became the leader the Allies needed. Not because he was smarter or more experienced or more confident. Because he was honest enough to see the truth, even when it was terrifying.